Hello again, my dear friends. Welcome back to our quiet, safe corner. Go ahead and take a long, slow stretch, letting your toes reach out and your shoulders completely soften. Feel the familiar heavy warmth of the evening begin to settle over you like a perfectly tailored quilt. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight and nothing else you need to do. The world outside can carry on without you for a while. Tonight is simply for resting. There is a beautiful quiet magic in waking up in a new place, knowing that the whole day ahead belongs to discovery. When the morning arrives, not with a rush or a loud alarm, but with a soft amber filtering of sunlight through a small cottage window, it feels like an invitation. An invitation to move slowly, to breathe deeply, and to look closely at the small wonders of the world. Tonight, we're going to join Rosco and friends as they step out into the fresh, untamed beauty of the hidden island, following a gentle path through the morning mist to bring harmony back to the hills. So take a deep, comforting breath of the cool night air, nestle down into your pillows, pull your blankets right up to your chinnigan, and let's join them as the sun peeks over the lake. The morning arrived on the island with the softest, most deliberate sort of grace. Long before the sun broke over the eastern hills, a gentle milky white mist floated up from the lake, wrapping the mushroom cottage in a quiet, protective blanket of silence. Inside, the only sound was the slow, rhythmic, whiskily puff of 4 little bunnies, breathing in perfect unison on the deep feather beds. Berry was the first to open a sleepy eye. His whiskers gave a tiny, inquiring twitch as he noticed a warm, golden thread of sunlight creeping across the braided rag rug on the floor. He didn't jump up. Instead, he rolled over slowly, pulling his favorite green wool blanket up over his nose for one last luxurious moment of pure, cozy warmth. By the time Rosco had set the small copper kettle on the hearth stove, all 4 bunnies were padded out of bed, their bare toe beans making a soft pitter-pat on the swept floorboards. For breakfast there was no hurry. They sat at the heavy oak table, savouring small bowls of warm oat porridge, sweetened with a simple drizzle of golden clover honey. "The wind is from the north today," Rosco said, looking out the low window at the tiny plume of smoke from the chimney, which was leaning lazily toward the southern water. "But Captain Codling says it's meant to turn. The warm south wind is waiting just beyond the hills, ready to open the night-blooming jasmine. If only the old hilltop Weathervane could turn to welcome it." Millie Moonbeam sat up a little straighter, her long ears perking with interest. "Then we must go and help it, Rosco. Pipkin Rope said the old trout Weathervane just needs a little bit of care." Caratina reached for their large woven willow basket, the one with the sturdy leather handle, that had travelled with them on the ferry. Inside, she carefully packed their tools for the day's gentle mission. First went a tiny corked stoneware jar filled with sweet lavender linseed oil. Next, she tucked in a small brush made of soft badger hair, perfect for clearing away old rust and dust without making a sound. Finally, Berry slipped a clean linen napkin into the bottom of the basket, leaving plenty of room for any wild treasures or sweet herbs they might forage along the path for their evening supper. Rosco lifted the heavy latch of the cottage door, and they stepped outside into the crisp, dew-kissed island air. The gravel path beneath their little shoes gave a soft, satisfying crunch as they turned away from the tiny stone harbour and began their unhurried amble up toward the high green hills where the morning mist was just beginning to part. The gravel path slowly dissolved beneath their feet, giving way to a soft, springy track of dark earth and crushed pine needles. As the bunnies ambled deeper into the interior of the island, the wide sky overhead was gently replaced by a thick canopy of ancient oak and silver birch trees. The morning sunlight filtered down through the leaves in long, slanting pillars of dusty gold, illuminating the swirling remnants of the lake mist like tiny floating specks of stardust. Soon the path dipped downward, leading them into a deep, sunken ravine known to the islanders as the Fernglow Hollow. The moment they stepped into the hollow, the air changed. It became wonderfully cool, damp and still, carrying the rich, clean scent of deep forest moss and wet stone. The walls of the ravine were entirely lined with giant, ancient ferns, fronds so long and heavy they curled over the path like emerald archways. Each delicate green leaf was fringed with a row of shimmering dew beads that caught the morning light, gleaming like strings of tiny glass pearls. Walking through the hollow was like stepping into a room lined with thick velvet carpets. The ground was so soft that the bunny's footsteps made no sound at all, allowing them to fully sink into the deep, insulating silence of the woods. "Look," Millie Moonbeam said, pointing a soft paw toward the base of a moss-covered limestone rock. "The moss has its own little lanterns." Growing along the damp stone were tiny patches of rare velvet moss, which seemed to hold on to the sunlight, glowing with a soft neon green luminescence in the shadows. A few steps further, a delightful melodic sound began to weave through the stillness. It wasn't a rush or a roar, but a delicate rhythmic tinkle that echoed softly off the ravine walls. Following the sound, the bunnies discovered the Pebble Brook Spring. The water bubbled up from a hidden crack in the stone, perfectly clear and bright, spilling over a bed of smooth, multicolored pebbles. Each drop struck the stones with a distinct musical note, sounding exactly like a tiny xylophone, playing a sleepy lullaby beneath the ferns. Caratina set the willow basket down on a flat, dry stone. "This is just the place for our first harvest," she said softly. Growing wild along the damp edges of the musical spring were thick, lush clumps of sweet watermint. Its jagged green leaves smelled vividly of crisp wintergreen and clean rain. With slow, careful movements, Caratina and Millie Moonbeam pinched off a few fragrant sprigs, taking care to leave the roots undisturbed. They laid the fresh mint gently upon the clean linen napkin inside their basket, the sweet scent mingling beautifully with the faint aroma of lavender oil. They lingered by the spring for a little while longer, watching the clear water dance over the pebbles, before picking up their basket and continuing their peaceful, slow amble out of the emerald hollow, heading toward the sound of the gentle lakeside shore. Leaving the deep green shadows of the hollow behind, the path wound gracefully toward the western edge of the island. Here the dense canopy of oak and birch opened up, returning the bunnies to the vast pale sky and the refreshing expanse of the lake. The mist had lifted now, leaving behind a sky the colour of a clean robin's egg, washed bright and beautiful by the morning sun. The path stepped down through a break in the low clay cliffs, leading the bunnies into a hidden crescent-shaped cove. This wasn't a beach of soft sand or rough gravel, but a shore made entirely of unique, water-polished stones. They were the click-clack pebbles, perfectly flat and smooth, rounded by decades of gentle lake currents, until they looked like hundreds of milky white buttons scattered across the shore. Each stone was cold and satisfyingly heavy to hold, worn down until it felt almost like a piece of silk in the paw. As the bunnies stepped onto the cove, they stopped to listen. The great lake was completely calm, sending only the smallest, laziest swells toward the land. Every time a gentle wave rolled onto the shore, it would slide the flat white pebbles forward with a soft shush. Then, as the water ebbed away, the stones would roll back against one another, making a rhythmic, incredibly soothing clack sound. It was a slow, hypnotic melody, sounding exactly like 1,000 tiny wooden clock gears, settling themselves into a comfortable, sleepy rhythm. Berry moseyed over to the water's edge, his long ears swaying with the movement of his head as he searched the shoreline. He knelt down slowly, his knees sinking into the dry, sun-warmed pebbles, and began to look for wild treasures. "Look at this one, Rosco," Berry said, holding up a stone that was perfectly oval, with a dark, smoky grey ring circling its middle like a tiny belt. "A lucky stone," Rosco smiled. "That will look very handsome sitting on the window-sill of our cottage tonight." While Berry selected a few choice stones to tuck into the corner of the basket, Caratina moseyed toward the higher bank of the cove, where the dry pebbles met the grassy fringe of the hill. There, tucked against the warmth of the sun-baked stones, grew wild lakeside brambles, their thorny vines laden with clusters of plump wild blackberries. They were deep, glossy purple, almost black, and looked like tiny clusters of dark jewels hanging in the green leaves. With great care, avoiding the small prickles, Caratina and Berry picked a small handful of the ripest berries. Each one was warm from the morning sun and smelled ever so sweet and rich. They laid them gently next to the fresh water mint, the dark purple berries contrasting beautifully against the clean white linen napkin. With their basket growing pleasantly heavy and their spirits entirely at peace, the bunnies turned back to the path, ready to ascend the fragrant hillside toward their final destination. The path turned upward one last time, scaling the gentle slopes of the island's highest hill. Here, the trees dropped away completely, opening up to a sweeping view of the wide blue lake below. The hillside was covered from top to bottom in a dense purple carpet of wild heather and green thyme, growing in thick, natural mounds that formed a labyrinth of twisting, fragrant walkways. Walking through the thyme was a sensory delight. With every slow step the bunnies took, their shoes brushed against the fragrant leaves, releasing a sweet herbal perfume into the warm morning air. The hillside was alive with a gentle murmur of sleepy bumblebees. They were so heavy with the morning's pollen that they nested deep within the purple blossoms, letting out only a low, comforting hum that seemed to vibrate through the very grass as the bunnies moseyed past. At the very crest of the hill stood a solitary pillar built of ancient grey stones, weathered smooth by decades of lakeside winds. Perched atop the pillar was the old Weathervane. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, shaped like a fat, leaping river trout made of solid brass. But just as Captain Codling had said, the poor fish was locked firmly in place, pointing rigidly toward the chilly north, unable to turn and welcome the softer days ahead. Rosco set the willow basket down in the soft grass. "Let's bring the balance back to the hill," he said softly. Berry reached into the basket and carefully lifted out the tiny stoneware jar of lavender linseed oil, while Millie Moonbeam held the soft badger hair brush. Rosco knelt by the base of the iron rod, using the brush to gently sweep away the fine layer of hill dust and dried orange rust that had gathered in the metal joints over the winter. Then, using just a few drops of the fragrant lavender oil, Rosco lubricated the ancient metal joints. For a long moment everything remained still. Then a soft, warm breeze blew up from the southern waters. The brass trout gave a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor, unlocked itself from the cold north, and swung lazily around in a smooth, silent circle, its polished sides catching the midday sun like a flash of gold. As the Weathervane pointed safely toward the south, the gentle breeze carried the sweet, intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine up from the lower valleys, signalling that harmony had returned to the island. With their mission beautifully accomplished, the bunnies felt a pleasant, heavy tiredness beginning to settle into their little legs. The long amble through the fresh hill air had done its work. Rosco lifted the willow basket, which now held their lucky stone, the sprigs of fresh watermint, and the plump wild blackberries, and they began their slow, contented descent back toward the harbour. When they stepped back inside the mushroom cottage, The round room felt twice as welcoming as it had that morning. The afternoon sun was setting, casting long, sleepy amber shadows across the braided rag rugs. There was no rush to the evening. Rosco kindled a small, quiet fire in the hearth stove, his gentle warmth immediately filling the kitchen. Together they prepared a simple, wholesome supper. Caratina rinsed the wild blackberries, placing them in a wooden bowl where they gleamed like dark velvet. Millie Moonbeam steeped the fresh water mint in a pot of hot well water, creating a fragrant steaming tea that smelled of clean rain and winter green. They let it cool before they popped in their curly straws. Millie Moonbeam toasted thick, crusty bread, just as good as the loaves from Nash's bakery, and prepared curls of creamy butter, placing them carefully on a slightly chipped blue plate. They ate their simple meal in a state of beautiful, quiet contentment, listening to the soft sigh of the southern wind brushing against the thatch roof outside. When the plates were cleared, the bunnies moseyed over to their large feather beds, their bodies completely relaxed and ready for sleep. Berry pulled his green wool blanket up, tucking it snugly beneath his chinnigan. Very cozy indeed. The island was at peace. The Weathervane was turning with the wind, and the cottage was perfectly warm. All was snug. All was well.